Thank you, Riley. My name's Mark McLaren with HDR, and I've had the pleasure of being the project manager for this effort for the last year and a half. And I'd like to cover a couple of areas tonight as outlined in the outline of the project concept, as Riley explained a moment ago. I'm going to start with the subject of rail operations, because both the level of service in terms of headways and the hours that a train would operate, as well as the equipment, not only in terms of the trains themselves, but the facility to store and maintain those vehicles is an important part of not only the operating cost, which we'll talk about, but also the capital cost for the construction of the facilities and the elements of that system. In developing this, as again, with your direction, we have focused on the idea that this is intercity service that begins with connecting Watsonville and Santa Cruz with the ability to then actually interline and provide connections via the UP main line outside of Pajaro Station to other points throughout the region and throughout the state. The vehicles that we have been discussing and that we've gotten feedback from the community on are multiple units, which are basically a car that has a cab at either end. They're put together with a train that has a cab at either end of it. And so that those two elements create one train set. And to operate the service that we're talking about, the train set that we need would be 5 of those pairs of vehicles to meet that service requirement. The hours of service that we've evaluated and identified is from daily from 6 a.m. To 10 p.m. And in accordance with the state rail plan, it's with the intent and the understanding that that service ultimately would be a 30-minute frequency, so a train every 30 minutes in each direction. But there is the possibility in the earlier initiation of the service to operate that service on an hourly schedule until ridership builds and the demand is there to increase that amount of time. It's also important to understand in the modeling that we've done in looking at the railroad infrastructure and the time that it takes the train to travel, the time that it takes to dwell at a station to allow passengers to get on and off, the travel time from end of the line from Watsonville into Santa Cruz to the Natural Bridges station, which would be the terminus on the western end, would take about 40 to 45 minutes, including the stops at those various locations. Additionally, we've conceptually identified a location where we could accommodate the facilities necessary to store the train, as well as to provide the maintenance of that vehicle or those vehicles when they're not in service. This is a significant part of the project because we need to have a railroad that can operate in its entirety and have all the things that it needs necessary to provide for regular maintenance and for other repairs during the life of the service. But it's also an area where as the other services in this region expand, as a part of other rail programs, there may be the ability through an economy of scale to share some of those services with other agencies. This operating plan then really becomes the basis for the conceptual ridership projections. So just at a high level, what is ridership forecasting?
Mark, did you want to advance the slides?
I'm sorry. Oh. Forgot to tell you, we need to move forward a slide. One more. There we go. Sorry. Rather than look at your screen, I was looking at mine so that I could look at you. So the ridership forecasting is basically a set of data-driven tools that try to understand and interpret what human behavior will be when there's a new service as a part of your transportation network that people have as an option for their travel that they don't currently have today. There's a lot of information that goes into that from a variety of different sources, and it's an important and regular part of transportation planning as we look at how we justify projects, and also a consideration when we look at different funding alternatives and the things that can be provided in terms of ways to advance the project. Next slide, please. Within that approach for this project, we actually relied on two tools. The first is Santa Cruz County's regional travel demand model, which I'll talk about in just a moment. And the second was what is a custom-built or direct ridership model, which was developed by Fair and Peers, who's represented by Chris Brayland here this evening, to take additional information to understand how some of the other things that are going on in the region as well as in the county could in fact benefit ridership to the transit system. I say that because in the regional travel demand model, by guidance from many agencies who evaluate this type of work for benefit of funding, we include projects that have been adopted or plans that have been adopted for the future of your communities. So when there's a new general plan, a new specific plan, a development project that's been permitted, for example, that there is relevance to, that can be put into the model and adopted in that way. But there's a lot of other things that are going on within the community, as well as types of travel, for example, to the boardwalk from tourism, that aren't typically captured in that type of model. And so for that, we have the direct ridership model tool that was developed that Farron Piers has used many times to take those other elements and pull them into the exercise so that we can understand a range of what the ridership is given what we know and was documented about land use and travel within the region, as well as the things that are online or coming online in the future that have not yet been adopted, as well as some of the other current activity that's not collected through traditional transportation surveys and information that's collected for the region. So this table presents the initial ridership ranges that are broken down to show you the ridership boarding forecast for each of the station locations along the line. The low number effectively represents what would come out of your direct out of your regional travel demand model of the things that are documented that we know that are online or will be online in the forecasted year of 2045, looking out at a time beyond which you would build this project and give it a few years to operate to really gain ridership as it becomes a part of people's daily routines. And the number on the right, the higher number, reflects additional information that we know that's specific to Santa Cruz County, things that are not typically captured and or things that are new plans that have not yet been adopted. So in this case, for example, I'll use Watsonville. There's a specific plan that you've developed for downtown. That information is included in the model. There's your general plan update that is not yet adopted. It is not in the regional travel demand model. However, it was considered in one of the things that was added into in what was done in the direct ridership model. So we've taken those tools and melded them together to provide that comparison. The center column here, the weekend information, is really when we develop these forecasts are on a daily basis, but understanding that there are characteristics that are unique about this area and some of the travel we've identified and kind of ranked on a propensity basis, which of those stations would have higher weekend or lower weekend ridership based on what we understand about travel patterns along the corridor. And this map represents relative representation of the ridership and the attractions. So as you can see from the map, the two most prominent stations on the line are downtown Watsonville and downtown Santa Cruz. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, there it is. And so those are the two stations that have the highest ridership in terms of this evaluation. It's also interesting to note that while the couple of stations that are in between are in fact lower ridership, those 3 or 4 stations cumulatively have about the same amount of ridership as the two major stations, being the Watsonville and Santa Cruz station locations. Next slide, please. We've also done and presented a comparison in response to some questions that came out of the conversation from Monday evening that Riley was referring to, just to show you how this ridership in the future would compare with a couple of other systems that are somewhat similar to what's being proposed here. On the two tables, it is the ZEPRT project that's represented on the left side of the column, both in terms of average daily boardings or ridership, and then on the right, how that compares on a per station basis. The second project that's there is the SMART project, which many of you may be familiar with here in Northern California. And the second two projects are actually in San Diego County, being the Coaster and the Sprinter. The Sprinter is, again, very similar in that it's a similarly length corridor that takes folks from another area and connects them in Oceanside to the Coaster service, giving them access to a larger travel margin in terms, or shed in terms of the places that they can go, not only in Southern California, but connections that are statewide as well. Next slide, please. So now I'm going to move on to the cost estimates, and specifically the capital cost. You may recall we had a conversation at one time about the estimated cost of the bridge program that was divided into a couple of key categories. As you go through the estimate that we're going to present to you tonight, you will not see a specific line item that reflects that number as one item, and that's because this cost estimate, as that one was, is broken into several different components, one being the construction, and then the other professional services and contingency to come up with the total. So we're going to talk about what's included within the total cost estimate. The bridge costs are incorporated within this, but just not as an individual line item the way that you saw them before. So the first category here is the guideway and track elements. So this is basically the work to recreate or develop the subgrade, build up the grade for putting in place ballast, ties, track, to build the guideway for the system. It's also important to note, while we have not included all the costs for the bike trail improvements, in those areas where we are rebuilding the railroad right-of-way to accommodate both the trail and the railroad, those improvements within that area are inclusive of the elements of the bike trail that would be in that section. The second area that's included within the estimate is stations. So the platforms, the shelters, the different amenities that are necessary to allow people access to locations to get on and off the system. We have support facilities, which is the layover facility specifically that I spoke about earlier, and the things that it provides in terms of vehicle storage and maintenance, as well as administrative space and other things that need to be done in terms of daily operations of the system. We have signals, systems, and communications, which is not only the communication for the system and its operators itself, it's also the communication systems and inform signals at intersections about arriving trains. It includes the signal equipment, the gates, and the protection that needs to take place at those locations, with the intent of being prepared, as we have discussed previously, about what that means for the opportunities for quiet zones within the corridor. The next item that's included is right-of-way. The right-of-way is primarily associated with the maintenance and storage facility site, or the vehicle facility. There is some allocation for some additional areas where we know that we have some narrow constraints that we might need to have additional right-of-way to accommodate that. We also have then the vehicles that are hydrogen powered, as we've discussed with the community. And then finally, we have professional services, which is the design and the construction administration of what it takes to build a system like this. And then finally, contingency. And the contingency, as we have discussed before, is commensurate with the expectations primarily of federal funding partners as to what should be accounted for at this stage of a project, as it has not been through the environmental process yet, and there are a lot of unknowns that will be discussed and resolved as you go through that process, as well as what you learn as you get more detailed information to move into final design. Next slide, please. So this table provides you with the summary of the costs associated with those categories as I've outlined them. This presents a total project cost in 2025 dollars of $4.28 billion. And as I mentioned earlier, that includes within that number the costs associated with the bridge replacements and rehabilitation that we have discussed previously. Next slide. So similarly, we've developed an operating expense estimate. At this level of the project, typically this is an estimate that represents the regular operation and maintenance of the system. It includes for maintenance of way, So that's taking care of the track, the signals, the ballast, the ties, all those other things that are part of the system, as well as the general administration and the labor associated with the operations of the trains, and finally materials and supplies such as utilities and fuel costs for the system. Next slide, please. We develop an estimate like this, and when a project's at this stage, by looking at an increment of the operation. So in this case, we're looking for each of the train revenue miles that the train operates, and we look at comparisons from similar projects around the country who are required federally to report that cost annually as a part of their projects. So on the table in front of you, you'll see 6 representative agencies from which we've looked at data because of things that are common about either the type of project, the type of operation, the type of equipment that they have in operation today, and what they provide. The blue and green differentiate between the agencies who either contract that service out or the agencies in green who hire their own staff to provide that service and to operate it. You will notice that Capital Metro in Austin is a little bit of an outlier. There is some question as to, because they, like you, have a corridor that the agency owns, and they have 2 contracted operators, one that operates freight, the other that operates passenger service. So there's not a lot of clarity that we're able to ascertain in terms of how they've accounted for the maintenance of that system in the buildup of this cost, but that's the cost that they report for federal purposes as a part of their project. So we took an average of these numbers, which were based at the last reporting period, 2023. They were escalated to account for $20-25 in that evaluation. We also added a 20% contingency on that because there's a couple of elements, particularly the use of hydrogen vehicles, where there's not a lot of historical data to rely on in terms of the specific cost of operating that equipment. And so we've accounted for that, as well as the fact that Santa Cruz Metro has reported and expressed in the past that they have to pay a premium compared to some other agencies to get transit operators to work in Santa Cruz County because of housing costs and other things that affect their decision to take those jobs. So the number that's on the screen right now, referring to the table, we take within the calculation there the number of annual train revenue miles, which is just over 500,000. We multiply it by the average rate, and for the 30-minute frequency of service, we come up with an estimate of $34 million a year before the 20% contingency to account for some of the unknowns or the challenges that we may have in staffing. And obviously, since this is just a simple calculation at this point in time, given the average experience of other agencies, if we were only operating a 60-minute service, it would be half the cost compared to the 30-minute service in the plan. Next slide, please.